Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
David Cameron is calling it the biggest overhaul of prisons since Victorian times, creating 6 new reform prisons in England and Wales, where governors will get new powers to tackle rising levels of violence and reoffending. Mr. Cameron said that the failure of the current system was scandalous, but that new technology would mean that criminals could spend more of their sentences outside prison.
Satellite tracking tags mean that we can know where an offender is every minute of the day. So it does create this possibility of being able to have different sorts of sentences where you put very strict rules on what someone who's created an offence can do and can't do.
Tonight, we've taken the Justice Secretary, Michael Gove, to the Mount Prison, just outside Hemel Hempstead, where he meets inmates face-to-face and asks them what changes they would like to see. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
Yes.
Michael Gove says he wants to change dramatically the prison experience for inmates.
Are any of them open? Can I have a quick look inside?
To prepare them for the outside world with more productive work inside prison, a more weekday release for prisoners near the end of their sentence, who would then return to jail at the weekend.
Sorry, I'm Michael. I'm the Minister.
Nice to meet you, Minister.
Nice to meet you. Nice to meet you. I just want to get a sense of the cell, because these cells look, I mean, you know, nobody wants to be inside, but they're relatively okay. Would it help if, in the run-up to being released, you were out on temporary licence for a bit?
Of course it would. Oh, you want? Yeah, it's the only way.
Now, some people would say, well, if we let you out on temporary licence, then there's a chance that you might abuse that trust.
It could happen. Well, we're only humans. I could make a mistake. I might make a mistake. I might not make a mistake. But how can we judge someone before it's happened?
Yes, and you're going to be let out anyway. So why not try and make sure that you've got the right preparation?
I'm not asking for any. No one's asking me anything. I don't want anything from anyone.
Nice to meet you. What's your name again?
Michael Gove.
Michael Gove, you're new Prison Minister, yeah? Yeah. Do a better job than that last one, yeah?
Well, we'll see. Okay, good luck.
Michael Gove hopes he can improve prison regimes by giving prison governors like Mark Drury more autonomy, just as he did with head teachers when he was Education Secretary.
Yes.
At the moment, your hands are tied. You can't shuffle money around budgets, that sort of thing.
Very limited on what we can move around. We have
loads of regulations from his ministry.
Yes. Yeah. So we have
thousands.
In fact, there are 46,000 pages of rules and guidance restricting what work or education is available inside prisons, even ruling on how many jigsaw puzzles are allowed in any cell.
One of the things I'm keen to do is to give governors the opportunity to actually make the life of staff easier so they can do their job better.
Yes, so there's items like that, and I think some of the training that we have to buy in.
Some unhappy customers there.
Yeah, that is one of our standard wings. So we're going to be going up here.
Okay.
Relocate.
If you were in my shoes, and you could tell the governors and you could work with the staff and get things to change, what would be top of your list?
Top of the list is what you call certain things like you need more time out of the cell and all that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The government insists tagging technology has made temporary release feasible, but giving prisoners out-of-cell productive activity inside the jail needs prison staff, and numbers were slashed in the coalition years. David Cameron's promised prison reform before, quite often, but the outgoing inspector of prisons, Nick Hardwick, is amongst those saying that reoffending rates and prison overcrowding have been getting even worse in recent years. The Inspector of Prisons, who you obviously rate highly because you've just given him another important job, and he says in the last 5 years things have got worse. But you announced a rehabilitation revolution in opposition. It was meant to be a burning passion of the Prime Minister. Why should anyone believe that you really mean it this time?
Well, I think just judge us on what we're saying and what we're doing.
Well, that's what people are doing. They're judging on what you've been doing for 5 years, and nothing much has changed.
I think a lot has changed. I think two things in particular.
For the worse, he says.
I think two things in particular.
The Inspector of Prisons says things have got worse in prisons in the last 5 years.
I absolutely acknowledge that in some prisons the situation has got worse, and for many prisoners the situation is not as it should be. But I also think that looking at the really difficult situation that the Chief Inspector describes, that's a challenge to me in order to ensure that we take the admittedly radical steps necessary in order to improve things.
You heard one of the prisoners we were talking to saying he thought the problem was there weren't enough staff.
Yes.
Your budget's shrinking year on year like most departments.
Yes.
We've already had thousands cut. There will be even more cuts, won't there?
No, there needn't be cuts. What there can be is flexible and imaginative deployment of staff. At the moment, there are restrictions for which I'm responsible, tie the hands of governors. I think, with the right will, that we can enable governors to run prisons in a way which is more flexible. We can give the opportunity to people who are running prison workshops to be more entrepreneurial.
There's a long tradition of politicians being converted to the idea of shorter sentences intellectually and then running terrified of the opinion polls. You're converted deep down, aren't you?
One thing I'm very keen on is not shorter sentences, but alternative sentences, similar to those which have been pioneered in America and indeed in the drugs court which ran in Liverpool. I think in some cases magistrates should have additional powers to be able to say to an offender that if they undertake a prescribed programme of treatment, that they won't go to jail, but if they do fail to follow through on that treatment, then their feet won't touch the ground. There's something else, though, that I think is important, and that is when prisoners are serving their sentences, towards the end of their sentence, I think that we should still keep them in custody at night, still ensure that they think of themselves as people who are serving a sentence, but allow them during the day out to work.
Some of your colleagues are saying you've gone pinko on them.
I don't think I'm a pinko in any area. I believe in cutting crime.
You talked about the blob in your last job.
Yes.
A resistant force that all had the opposite view to you, the educational establishment. Who's the blob in this world that you're in now?
I don't think there is a blob.
It's not the Ministry of Justice.
No.
It's not the Treasury. You don't let you have enough money.
No. I don't think there is a blob. Whether or not there was a blob in education, people will decide. I don't think there is a blob in justice.
Maybe the blob is opinion polls and your own right-wingers in the Conservative Party,
who
don't let many justice ministers do what some of them would like to do.
We had a debate on prisons in the House of Commons just a couple of weeks ago. What was striking is that there were far more Conservative MPs who wanted to speak and far more Conservative MPs than any other party who wanted to make the case for prison reform.
One other thing in your entree as Minister of Justice is the possibility of coming up with some sort of National Sovereignty Act that asserts Parliament's sovereignty while we're still in the European Union.
Yes.
That's just a nonsense, isn't it?
It's not a nonsense at all. I think it's important to look at the example that other European countries have. In Germany, for example, they have a constitutional court. That constitutional court has the power to say that sometimes EU law could be inconsistent with Germany's own basic laws.
You're clearly quite passionate about your job, and the wonderful thing is you get to keep your job and decide which way you want to vote in the referendum. So why not just say, I'm going to rule out staying in?
So I'm going to wait until the Prime Minister comes back from the Brussels Council with the concluded deal and then reach a judgment.
On these terms, the Prime Minister said last week, on these terms, if we weren't a member, I'd go in to Europe. Would you?
I think, in fairness, I need to wait until...
He didn't.
I've heard all the evidence.
He didn't wait.
The Prime Minister...
He thought he'd seen enough.
...has a freedom of manoeuvre, which, as leader of the party and as the winner of the general election, he is fully entitled to. I think my role...
He also said, follow your heart. That was his advice to MPs.
Yes.
You're said to be agonising. Will you follow your heart?
I think it's very good advice from the Prime Minister, but the important thing is that it's a heart and head decision, I think, for everyone.
Michael Gove there talking to Gary Gibbon, wriggling free perhaps from the questioning. And joining me now are Carl Cattermole, who spent a year in Wandsworth, Wormwood Scrubs and Pentonville prisons, and John Attard, a governor in the prison service and a national officer at the Prison Governors Association. Carl, in your experience, what needs to change about prisons?
Less people need to be in prison. There needs to be less drugs and there needs to be more education available for all of those who need it to get back on the right track.
Give us a sense of why you're saying that, what it was like for you.
For me, I'm relatively more educated and was able to take control of my own situation, but many people find it really hard to get back on their feet. And in fact, prison puts them further down the rung. it makes them less compatible with society rather than more.
Why?
Because drugs are rife, they're everywhere. And when you have people exiting prison with a habit that they didn't have when they entered with one, it's a disaster. People, you know, like, I'd walk down the corridor and I'd see adverts for illiteracy courses, and they'd say, do you want to learn to read and write? And I'd be looking at them thinking, these people can't read and write, so how are they going to read this sign? The offer of help is very limited, and prisoners need real help. They need genuine help.
John Attard, from the governor's point of view, how do you view this, the idea of more freedom? What freedom do you want?
Well, I think prison governors for many years have been asking for more freedom as the services become more centrally controlled. For example, the education contract is not created by the prison governor, and the prison governor doesn't even have a say in what's delivered in terms of the curriculum. We'd like to see that changed. Simple things like who you contract to change a light bulb. It's very much centrally driven. If we're going to get control, which I think the PGA cautiously welcomes, and I use the term cautiously because we haven't seen the detail, we haven't had any consultation up until this point, then yes, we would welcome it. More freedoms, though, have to come with one important aspect, and that's more money. We talk about getting prisoners into education, and I think the point that Carl makes is absolutely right. But if we can't get prisoners from their cells to education safely because we haven't got enough staff to monitor the route, then we're not going to deliver decent education. The same applies to workshops, hospital visits, etc.
I mean, Carl, how much is that shortage of prison officers an issue, and that shortage of resources?
You know, people will come halfway across the country to visit you, and then you wouldn't be able to get unlocked because of a staff shortage. Let alone getting to, it's just, if the realisation of an education revolution is going to come true, then it needs to be backed up by funding for staff and all of the other areas that are lacking.
But if you have the resources you have, what freedom do you want? I mean, what would you like to do as a governor that you can't do at the moment?
Okay.
That you think would really make a difference for people like Carl?
OK, I think we need to look at one of the things that the National Offender Management Service introduced in order to deliver the savings that were required. Over the last few years, governors have made savings of around £150 million, and that's not a small amount of money. And to do that, they introduced what was called a benchmark. Now, the benchmark dictated the number of staff that you would have in your type of prison, and this is non-negotiable. Once you have a staffing level, you can make a separate case for increased staffing, but pretty much you're going to a standard model. I think if we're really going to have a true what would call it, a rehabilitation revolution, then what we need to do is zero the benchmark and start again, and then see how many staff governors really need and allow them to honestly cost the running of their prisons.
Just finally, in any sense, I mean, David Cameron was the special advisor for Michael Howard when he said prison works. Do you think prison works in any sense at all?
I think that prison is a disaster as it stands. I know that from my own experience. I know that from other friends who've been in prison. No. No, that's a very simple answer. Thank you very much. Simple. Carl Cattermole and John Attard. Thanks both for joining us.